All right, I think I'm going to get us started. Callie, if you want to get the slides kicked off, we welcome you to the Massachusetts Innovation Pathways webinar series. This is actually a workshop that was in person, and of course, given the current circumstance, we have made it remote, and we are glad you're all here to join us. In order to make the most of this morning's online workshop experience, we do have a few sort of overall recommendations. The first is to please mute yourself when you're not talking so that we can minimize background noise for yourself and for others. If you are going to speak or you'd just like to show your wonderful faces to us this morning, please think about adjusting your lighting so we can see you. We do have an active chat feed on your screen. It should be on the right side by default of most of your screens. And you can contribute to that chat at any time, and we'll do our best to be responsive. There will be polls that will appear, and we ask that you respond to those. And there will be some prompts later to join breakout rooms, and we ask that you respond to those as well. We want to make this workshop as interactive as possible. And finally, you'll have the ability to make your own screen suit your own desire for how you want everything to look, but we recommend having speaker view in your control panel so that you can see speakers, particularly during presentation portions. And there is a raised hand feature that will get our attention if there is any specific needs that we can address, or if you have a question. Otherwise, we look forward to getting started. Next. So just to introduce ourselves, my name is Diana LeBeau, and I'm the Director of District and School Design Programming at the Center for Collaborative Education out of Boston. I'm joined today by members of the Massachusetts Department of Education team, specifically Jennifer Gwatkin, the Innovation Pathways Lead, and Carrie Occasion, the Career Development Education Lead. From my own CCE team, I'm joined by Oscar Santos, our Executive Director, Don Shearer-Corin, Callie Cornell, Gary Chapin, and Ruth Ellis. Also wanted to give a shout out to my colleague Andres St. Rose, who's not with us today, but who you'll hear from at certain points through your involvement in the community of practice. Next. So the Center for Collaborative Education, for those of you who are first joining us today, we are an organization, as I mentioned, out of Boston, but we work nationally to transform schools to ensure that all students succeed. And we partner with educators and leaders to develop strategies, processes, and tools that support our vision of schools to prepare every student to achieve academically and to make a positive contribution to a democratic society. We are the technical assistance partners with DESE on the Massachusetts Innovation Pathways work. And this year, you may well have heard from us about site visits, workshop days, webinars, and more. And this will be continuing for the next few years, hopefully more in-person events in future. Coming up later this year, for example, we have, while we're hoping for a site visit in May, we're kind of waiting to see what evolves with our current situation. And we will be having a workshop in June for new applicants for Innovation Pathways. That may move to be online depending on the circumstance. A few things we know for sure though, May 11th from 1 to 2 p.m. there will be an Innovation Pathways Toolkit release party of sorts online, and we'll be sending out registration information in the near future, so please look out for that. And finally, the biannual Innovation Pathways Connecting Activities convening has been postponed to fall 2020, but we do look forward to seeing you then. And for more information on these events, as well as resources, materials, the slides from today's webinar workshop, may be all found on our Innovation Pathways website. It's still a work in progress, but resources are up, so we invite you to join us, and you'll see the address at the bottom of your screen. So today's goals are to provide opportunities to engage with industry professionals and schools around the qualities of effective work-based mentorship programs. And I want to be clear, when we talk about mentorship here, it's not a specific separate mentorship program. We're talking about the daily mentorship that comes along with a well-developed internship, capstone, or other work-based learning experience. We're also going to engage with some thinking around continuous improvement, focusing specifically on those relationships between students and their industry and school-based mentors. And finally, we hope that you have the opportunity to build connections across the designee network. That's actually one of the reasons why we have built in so many opportunities for interaction today. Next. So this is today's agenda. It's a little different than it would have been if we had been able to be in person, but we were able to really keep some of the essentials. You'll notice that we have a great panel discussion figured out coming up soon. And we also have the opportunity for breakout discussions coming later this morning. So we invite you to stick around for us for the whole time because we have some great opportunities to interact with each other and with some experts in the field. Before we kick off some of the learning this morning, I wanted to elevate some community agreements that CCE has offered in the past at these meetings. And they include all of the items listed on your screen. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I specifically want to elevate number 7, step up, step back. When there's opportunities to interact online, it's often very difficult to be mindful of our airtime. So just an invitation to make sure we are doing as much listening as speaking during the breakout sessions that will happen later. But we are so eager to interact with you all that I invite you to take just a minute and let us know if these work for you or if you have any suggested additions, deletions, or changes. If you have any questions or concerns, please continue to chat in the chat box and we will revisit anything that comes up as a serious concern for the group. Next. So I don't want to go much further without acknowledging that these are not ordinary times. Work-based learning, like everything else in our society, has taken a real hit at this particular period of time. While we're all socially distancing, we're all scrambling to find ways to meet students' needs as best we can, while acknowledging all of the competing demands facing them, the social emotional ramifications of the current period, let alone the health implications for many. We acknowledge this webinar might, for some of you, feel like we're talking about the distant future, but we did want to take this chance to think deeply about a topic that always is going to feel relevant around relationship building. And throughout, we will insert little pieces that suit the particular period of time we're in right now, where we're working more remotely, as well as to think ahead toward the future when we are able to interact more in person and think best about how to leverage the opportunities that that will afford us with the students, teachers, and industry professionals able to come together. Next. I also wanted to, on that topic, leak the information that we will be including in our toolkit to be released in May, a tool focused on remote work-based learning specifically. And it feels more relevant than ever, so we wanted to let you all know that this is coming. And this is one item that we have available for early release, so please look out for opportunities to get your hands on this tool well in advance of May, and we want to make sure it's available to you all right now and it feels most pressing. It does look, among other things, at the relationship building aspect in this remote circumstance. Next. All right, I want to begin with a little bit of connections. So I've seen there's a lot of you in the room with a lot of different hats that you wear. We've already invited some of you, but if you have not yet done so, please share in the chat window your name, your school and district. And also, I am going to post, and it should appear in the middle of your screen, a poll for you all to respond about what you think of as the most important characteristic or competency for a work-based mentor overseeing high school-aged students. So I'll give you a minute or so to respond either to the chat window, the poll, or both. Seeing a lot of responses coming in. Give you all about a half minute more to respond to the poll. It looks like we've got about 3/4 of you who've been able to respond. So nice to see so many people from all over the state. One advantage of these remote meetings is the folks on the extreme ends of the state don't have long drives. All right. So thank you all. And I'm going to briefly share the results. We will revisit these in just a minute. But clearly, strong communication stood out as the winner for many of you, with strong contenders in consistency, empathy and understanding, and flexibility. I am not saying that any of these are not incredibly important, but I would definitely agree with some of the priorities that arose here. We'll talk about more of this in just a few minutes. So let's move on, Kelly. So I want to share a few sort of operating best practices, principles, and different ways of thinking about student-mentor relationships. The idea of developing the mentor-student relationship really means focusing on how to prepare both the work-based mentor, that's the primary person that's supervising the intern or the capstone learners, and the students themselves to get off to a good start, developing a trusting and supportive relationship, which will ultimately lead to a successful experience and ideally a lot of learning. Next slide. So these are some of the principles that really contribute to long-term success. Principles I use loosely here, but these are some of the emphases, I guess, that we recommend. One of those is a goal-informed work plan that really helps establish what the expectations are around the students' personal goals and the goals of the work-based host, as well as the educators. So ideally, these are established in collaboration among those folks. The well-developed rubrics piece, we have held a webinar previously on rubrics, and we invite you to check that out on our website if you haven't yet been able to see that. But rubrics that are established before the start of an internship that are in alignment with the work plans can ensure that students and mentors have clarity about how the student will be assessed within their educational institution. Workplace expectations are sort of the opposite of that. So that's the expectations of the workplace itself, which should be made clear to the student and could be explicitly part of the work plan. You all highlighted communications as an emphasis, and planned communications among all of the parties is a critical piece here. These can include debriefing. These can include how to communicate around challenges that arise. Supportive resources to ensure equity could include support for students in preparing to code switch to work-based language and comportment, helping mentors better understand students' individual learning needs, providing tools that will make the work-based experience more accessible to students, educator sort of human support as well. These are all some expectations. We could go much deeper into the equity resources and supports. We did hold a previous workshop on this topic, and we could expand on that at some point during the question and answers if others have interests. And finally, clear roles and mentor expectations, which would be laid out with the prior things like the goal-informed work plans. Also around expectations, I know that some successful internship and capstone experiences include a kind of an agreement between the work site and the school that goes beyond sort of the official MOU or agreement and really lays out some specific roles between the educator and the work-based mentor. Slide, please. And on the topic of expectations for mentors, you know, you all talked about communication being critical. You all talked about flexibility. These are all things that we've seen built into work plans as well as agreements between mentors and schools. And again, these can be very separate from sort of any legal layout of the relationship between the partner organization and the school, but can make things much clearer for everyone. The other thing I would say around communication, which again rose to the top here, is that a lot of times there are industry specific, and this is definitely true for education as well, acronyms, assumptions, things that we presume are kind of universally understood. And what we've found is that these relationships are most successfully established when those expectations, those assumptions, those vocabulary differences are made clear at the beginning, so that both parties can engage fully in the conversations about how to support the students' needs. Finally, I wanted to share some pitfalls that we recommend avoiding. The first is around how the relationship really walks a balance between educational and professional. And this is a little different than, let's say, a college or graduate level internship or even postgraduate internship. It is appropriate for the professional to take the lead in terms of over the personal, but it is important to be clear that high school interns are not fully fledged adults yet. They're still developing as humans and learners, not simply as professionals, and not all folks at the workplace are ready or prepared for that level of development and growth. And so it's really helpful to lay out that expectation at the beginning and think about how to support the learner as a learner. The second one is around an emphasis on sort of skill sets and resume building. These are assets that can be encouraged. The third here, avoiding seizing control from the students. Student agency is really critical. This is an example of the code switching that a student may need to learn, that they have to take some initiative for their own professional engagement and initiating some relationships and discussion points with their supervisors, while also listening and receiving feedback. And finally, around this last point, this image is captured from the Equity Institute. It shows, it's pretty small on your screen, but it shows multiple sizes and shapes and designs of sneakers. But the idea here is that one successful work-based learning project or experience does not equate to success every time. Personalization and connection to community matters, and equity should always be at the fore. I'm a little behind on time, so if we look at slide 18 right now, we did think through some of the critical questions that align with each of the guiding principles. I'm not going to read these aloud because, again, I want to make sure we don't lose too much time just with you all listening to me, but I will leave this up on the screen for a minute for you all to think about how these questions may prompt you to think critically about how your school or your workplace is supporting some of the fundamentals of strong work-based learning. These ones on this screen focus on equitable access, guided academic pathways, and enhanced student support. And again, these will all be shared out with you all so you can see these slides in the future. Kelly, on the next slide, we focus on connections to career and effective partnerships. So I'll leave this up for a minute for you all to review quickly. This last piece on effective partnerships is a critical one. If the partnership is effective for all parties, then you really set up the experience for success. Finally, I want to just share out a few more resources. When you all have a copy of this slide deck, these are clickable, and we definitely invite you all to avail yourselves of the opportunity to check them out. So now I'm going to turn it over briefly to my colleague, Dawn Shearer-Corin, who can share a little bit about one particular model around relationship building.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Dawn, and I'm a member of the CCE team. I want to introduce you to the Search Institute's framework for developmental relationships. And I'm very interested in knowing if any of you are familiar with this framework already, and would invite you to share that in the chat box. We will take a few minutes here just to look at the 5 elements of their developmental relationships. And we'll start first by looking here at the definition. I really like their definition because it talks about how our relationships with others really help to cultivate our abilities to shape our own lives. And what this talks about and is referring to is the idea that how we see ourselves in the world has a lot to do with how people treat us, how people interact with us, in those relationships that we have. In looking at the first 2 elements, you see here, care and growth. And all of these elements relate back to some of the things Diana already talked about this morning. I want to talk about the fact that care has a lot to do with a sense of belonging. And this idea of helping students to be motivated and build confidence has everything to do with how they're welcomed into our spaces, how we create a welcoming environment for them. And so not only do we show care by creating these welcoming spaces, but by sincerely letting students know and letting young people know that we see them just the way they are, and that we accept them for who they are, and we make connections with them. Supporting the identities that they have, and again, fostering these opportunities for how we want them to see themselves in the world. When we think about growth, it has everything to do with how we balance the difference between giving students guidance and also helping to foster a sense of agency. And so, of course, we want all of our students to continue to have a sense of self, and we want them to be able to be independent and self-advocate for themselves. And so while we support this idea of growth and we want to help them to see their potential and live up to their potential, and expect the best of them, as it says here as one of the actions for challenging growth, we also want to support a sense of agency among them. Growth is about helping students to set attainable goals and holding them accountable for consistent effort towards those goals. It's also about how we push students to try hard, but we don't come down too hard on them when they don't get it exactly right. And instead, we help them to see where there's room for growth and help them identify their potential. You'll see on the next slide the 3rd, 4th, and 5th elements. And this 3rd element is about support. Support is something we talk about often. And I think that we have to be aware of how students, again, really strive to be independent. When they're coming into a young adulthood and they're entering into our high schools and getting towards the end of their high school career, this idea of independence is not only something that we talk about all the time in the education field, but that we know students also want to have a sense of independence and they want to be able to make their own decisions. And so when I think about support, I think it's really critical that we pay attention to language and how we frame this idea of support for students. Oftentimes we talk about homework help, and places where we create help spaces for students. And I think that it's important that while there's no doubt that they need our guidance and our direction, that in respects to providing support, we want to help them to navigate the environments that they're in, and we want to advocate for them while also setting boundaries. So again, thinking about support and what it is that we say and how we frame it for them, and balancing this idea of a sense of agency and how we set up the opportunities, the tools, the structures that we often refer to, particularly for students that come from marginalized communities, whether it's language or culture or race. We want to also keep in mind that we want to partner with them. And that's some of what you see in that fourth element with power. This sense of power is related to this idea that they want to be included, and they want to be respected. So include me, but also respect my voice. Don't include me and then not let me have voice and have input into the space. And it's also this idea that they want to be led, right? So lead me, but collaborate with me. And I think that our roles, both as the staff and the adults in the schools, but as well as, of course, our partners in the work-based learning spaces, we're leaders as we mentor our students. And so we want to make sure that we're not only leading them and giving them direction, but we're also giving them a sense of power, and we're giving them a space to exercise what it is that they bring to the table and to share that with us. And this last element around expanding possibilities is really exactly what we're doing in Innovative Pathways. We're attempting to expose students to opportunities and to allow them to be connected in the world. And so as we think about mentoring them and the expectations that we have from our work-based partners, we want students to be in placements and be in workplace environments where they have opportunities for professional development in those spaces, to really be exposed to opportunities to connect with others, and to use that space as a network to really build relationships with adults and other young people that might be there. I think your point in the poll around strong communication stood out for me as well. If I had answered the poll, I also would have said communication. I think the idea of giving students opportunities to really understand and be communicated with about everything that's going on around them gives them opportunities to continue to grow, ask questions, and develop in these placements. So as I wrap up sharing this framework with you again, I'll be checking back actually in the chat box after I finish sharing with you, and am interested to find out what all of you thought about this framework, or if you already were familiar with it. There is a link on the resource page to the framework, and I just wanted to share on this slide here. This is sort of what the framework looks like. It's available in English and Spanish at the Search Institute's website, and they have an abundance of resources there that I encourage you to check out. They have free downloadable activities that you can do with young people, as well as really easily accessible documents like this one I'm sharing here that allows you to think through some of the ways that you want to help your work-based partners think about how they're working with students. And I'll just wrap up by saying that I encourage you, and Callie, you can move to the next slide, please, to think about, as you reflect on our conversation today, you know, what are the things that you are already doing? I'm certain that everyone has thought about these different aspects and in different ways, and I'm certain that we're all exercising them and helping our students to have power, share the power with them, expanding their possibilities. But while you think about what you're doing, certainly think about what are the areas of growth. How can you continue to grow in supporting developmental relationships, as well as working with your work-based partners? What I want to wrap up by saying is that it's not just the innovative pathways in the structures and opportunities that we create, but it's going to have everything to do with how we support students. And I just use that word support, right? But how do we build the relationships with students and give them the opportunities and the space that's going to make or break, if you will, how successful they'll be in our pathways. So thank you for letting me share, and I'm going to pass it next, I believe, to Carrie.
Yeah, and before Carrie gets started, I wanted to also share that Jennifer chatted in the chat box the link to the Search Institute with those resources. And I just wanted to highlight that the Search Institute does have a COVID-19 remote learning specific slate of resources, at least one or two that I've seen. So definitely worth checking out.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. So yeah, I'm presenting research findings and implications for student and mentor relationships from my own research when I was studying at Lesley University. Next slide. So the key takeaways are just a brief overview of key findings and conclusions from my research and some implications for mentors of high school students and emerging adults, specifically for female students and students of color. So when I was going into my research, I was an internship coordinator for seniors in high school that were they were making major life choices, and I found that they were so stressed. They had so much anxiety over choosing what could be their next step. Where do I want to live? What do I want to do? Where do I want to go to school? And this was in an urban environment. And mostly I found that the girls were very, very worried about this. Like which career am I going to choose? And at the same time, as I was an internship coordinator, I was also a career development coach for emerging adult women in their 20s. So while I was conducting the research, I decided to find out kind of what's happening during this time, what's going on, and how can I better serve students throughout from high school and after college, because there's obviously something that girls and people of color are not getting in college if they're entering the workforce with still that sense of stress and anxiety. So what I did was I studied kind of the traditional college student, ages 22 to 25, who have just left college and entered the workforce. During this time, it was pretty complicated because there's not a lot of research out there that focuses on career development for girls and people of color. So that was a whole other process, but it was really fascinating what I found out. And the four main findings, I think you can switch the slide, were that, actually the next one is fine. Choice. Students experience a shift in self-perception in the context of choice. They went from, one student explained it as, I felt like it was like a patient to an agent, a patient receiving care, and to an agent kind of responsible for all these major life decisions for the first time. And these students were just not, these young professionals were just not prepared for those choices. But also in those experiences, those choices helped them gain self-esteem, and that was extremely important. So while there's so much emotional turmoil going on with making these choices, and I can only anticipate that choices are going to get more complicated in the context of COVID, making students really learn to really evaluate what they're doing and make small choices can help increase their self-esteem and increase their labor force attachment. Something else I found was that achievement was extremely stressful. The context of achievement, there are all these pervasive images of this can-do girl and young professional entering the workforce, entering this amazing job for the first time. But when they get into the workforce, that's just not the reality. Often there are rounds of interviews. The people I studied had 6 rounds of interviews before they actually got their job or didn't get their job. And so students are really, young professionals were really not prepared for that it's not just this one-off amazing interview. What are your strengths and challenges? It's really like, you can have 6 rounds of interviews and still not get the position, or you can lose out to someone who from another state who was better prepared. And so there are all these implications for mentors of students that we need to think about. It's not just that one-off. Some people have had students develop their own kind of report cards because in the real world, you don't get that feedback from a mentor that is obligated to speak to you. There aren't any guidance counselors, right? So having a student develop their own kind of report card so that they know that they're doing well is one recommendation. Another finding was that coping with emotional conflict, most women that all women that I studied, communication was very difficult for them. They used avoidant coping mechanisms and did not bring up any type of disagreement with their superiors. They were afraid that it would cause conflict, and oftentimes they would leave the position. So really working with your students on being able to handle workplace conflict and being able to voice disagreements is something that's extremely important for them to work on while they're in your care or in your classroom. But then finally, support systems were catalysts for positive growth and development. And what was interesting was that it didn't always have to be somebody of similar identity. There were men who helped advocate for young women, but they really did have to show this sense of care and really interest in their own work and their own voice. So, and there is much more that I can provide to you, and many more recommendations, but this is just a brief overview of what I found in my research, and feel free to email me for additional questions. Thank you.
All right, I will turn it over then to, thank you, Carrie, and I will turn it over to Callie Cornell now, who will get us started with our panel discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all of that great information. So we are so excited to have a really excellent group of panelists this morning to share their expertise and experience with us. And so we have 4 panelists here this morning. We have Liz Malone, who is in her 5th year at Leominster Center for Excellence in Leominster, Massachusetts. Leominster Center for Excellence is part of the Big Picture Learning Network of high schools, which are focused on student-directed real-world learning. Liz was an advisor for 4 years and had the same class from freshman to senior year. And she's currently the Learning Through Interest Coordinator, where she assists in setting up real-world opportunities for the whole school community, as well as fostering those student-mentor relationships. So Liz, welcome and good morning. We also have Kristen Almquist Savalos. Kristen's the Director of Early College and Career Pathways at Dearborn STEM Academy here in Boston. So following her career change as an employment law attorney, Kristen has made urban education, or has been in urban education in Boston, the Boston area, for the last 13 years. She began her career as a history teacher in education and then transitioned to the founder of 3 Career Pathways and the creator of a successful early college program. She then advanced to become an 11th and 12th grade assistant principal at a large comprehensive high school. In her most recent role at the Dearborn STEM Academy, she has built multiple early college partnerships, launched an interdisciplinary computer science pathway, is currently creating 2 additional pathways in both health and life sciences, as well as engineering, all of which are aligned to the Boston area labor market demand and projected industry growth. Kristen's work is centered around preparing underrepresented students for college and career, and to be able to earn a family-sustaining wage in the Boston area upon graduation. So good morning, Kristen. Next, we have Andrew Klaus. Andrew is a group head in research and development at Gillette and P&G in the packaging development. And he is a team focused on technical design and technical documentation for the global blades and razors portfolio. So that includes Gillette, Venus, Joy, The Art of Shaving, all of which I'm sure you've heard before. He is the Gillette team lead for corporate partnership with Dearborn STEM Academy, where they work on executing curriculum development, internships, externships, field trips, scholarships, and more, as well as a member of Dearborn STEM Academy's Industry Advisory Council. Andrew has a chemical engineering bachelor's degree from the University of Florida. And he also has over 9 years of experience with P&G across multiple brands, businesses, disciplines within research and development. He's passionate about developing STEM and being a steward of good corporate citizenship. We also hear that he's an accomplished cook, sailor, skier, and reader. So welcome, Andrew, and thank you for joining us this morning. And then finally, we have Oscar Santos, who was introduced briefly at the beginning. Oscar is the executive director for the Center for Collaborative Education, where he leads the CCE team, the program team in strategic development, the operations activities. He is in communication with district leaders and superintendents, and also leads the organization's learning and culture. Before joining CCE, Oscar was president of Cathedral High School in Boston, where he led the expansion to house the Cathedral STEAM Applied Learning Center. And then during his tenure at the school, they had 6 years of 100% graduation and college acceptance. Oscar also served as superintendent of schools in Randolph Public Schools, where he launched an in-district alternative education program, as well as an innovative social emotional learning initiative. Prior to Randolph, Oscar was a principal at Boston International High School, which was the first Boston high school specifically designed to educate English language learners. And prior to going into educational leadership, Oscar served as an AmeriCorps Service Learning Fellow and a high school teacher, where he was recognized as Boston's Teacher of the Year. So Oscar certainly has a variety of experience in different roles connected to building and executing on work-based learning opportunities for students. So thank you all for being here. We are so very excited to have you. I'll give you a moment to unmute yourselves and make sure your cameras are working. While I speak to those that are participating. Throughout this panel, you'll get the chance to ask the panelists questions. So please use the raise your hand function and the chat box, sort of whichever method you prefer, to ask your questions. So I'll start off. I've got a few introductory questions for our panelists, but then we invite you to ask your own questions, and we'll monitor those as best we can, make sure we get to as many as we can in the time that we have. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll start with our first question. If you could just please introduce yourself and sort of tell us a little bit about your role in building student-mentor relationships. And then if you could also share sort of your #1 lesson learned around the student-mentor relationship building piece of your work. Let's go ahead and start. We'll start with Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Almquist, Ceballos, Director of Early College and Career Pathways at Dearborn. Currently, we're launching, if this virus allows us to, our internship program for our computer science students, but we are also working with Andrew and Gillette to develop the internship and mentorship program at Gillette for our engineering students for next year. And Callie, I'm sorry, what was the final question that you wanted us to?
Your #1 lesson learned around student-mentor relationship building.
As a school-based person, working with a non-school-based person, I think to keep in mind that you're not always working with someone with an education background. So how to sort of navigate the learning for students when someone isn't necessarily categorized as an educator.
Great, really important. Andrew, why don't we hear from you next?
Yeah, so like you said, Andrew Klaus, I lead the team at Gillette here in South Boston that works with Kristen and the rest of the team at Dearborn. We are their industry partner for engineering and advanced manufacturing pathway. We've been partnering with them for about 1.5 to 2 years now, I believe, Kristen, in various capacities. And last year, I actually had one of the 2 interns that we had from Dearborn I was his coach. So I directly was responsible for coaching and mentoring an intern last summer, and then was involved with the other intern as well. I'm involved in general with intern programs, and have been most of my career with BNG and co-ops, but mostly at the college level. So high school is a new introduction. And I'd say that the biggest learning there is, despite the fact that we do routinely hire freshman interns as a corporation from college. High school interns are different and need to be not respected, but treated and prepared differently than we had expected. We knew there was going to be differences, and Kristen helped us prepare for some of those differences. But I still think that we were a little bit more surprised, if I'm being completely frank and honest with everybody, on some of the things that we had to adjust versus our regular internship program.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm so glad you mentioned that. So that's sort of reiterating a point that Diana referenced earlier, but also we're going to put a pin in that because I'm going to come back to asking you a little bit more about that in just a little while. Liz, let's hear from you.
Hi, so I'm at the Leominster Center for Excellence, and our school is based on student interest. It's student directed, so they follow their passions and interests, and they have internships 2 days a week throughout the school year. So I had freshmen through seniors. So I've met a lot of different. I've had a lot of different mentors. We set up a lot of different relationships, and now I'm helping all of the students in the school. So I would say a really key important piece is to have students go out and conduct a lot of informational interviews and meet people face to face. A lot of times students might have a certain expectation going into it. It's really important to have them go out and experience what it's like talking to people, making those connections, and seeing if that's not just a right fit based on their interests, but also a really good fit based on the relationship and the individual that they have as a mentor.
Mm. So incredibly important. Thank you, Liz. And Oscar, if you could introduce yourself, share a lesson.
Good morning, everyone. As Diana and Callie mentioned, I'm a lifelong educator, and I'm putting on my hat today as a president of a 7 through 12 school. And what I can tell you that my job primarily was to recreate a culture for a school and for teachers and students with businesses. And the key lesson that I learned in that process was that it was about making sure that you infuse the work into the culture of the school. And what I mean by that is that we started with our 7th and 8th graders. It was a 7 through 12 school where they had people come in and do small roundtables and workshops. As 9th graders, students had opportunities to do exploration and workforce development, looking at the MASCA skills in terms of what it was to Mass Association of School Counselors came up with 21st century skills, which was great. So it was embedded right into our curriculum. As 10th graders, students would then have the opportunity to have a broader exploration. In their junior and senior years, they had what we called reconcentrations. And the power of that is that the key lesson is that it needs to be built into the culture of the school. It's not an add-on. It's something that has to be embedded into the culture of how you do learning and teaching in addition to learning beyond the school day. So that's the key lesson, the power that surfaced from this. And I'm really proud of the fact that 100% of our students graduated, but more importantly that over a 4-year period, 76% of our students graduated from college. And when we did the research, what we found was that students, going back to Carrie's point, they felt that people cared about them, they had a sense of achievement, and they had support systems. So it's right in line with Carrie's research, which kind of speaks to the power of this work.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. I'm actually going to loop back, Andrew, and start with a question for you. Can you share a little bit about the processes that your company went through to ensure that employees were prepared to work with high school age youth? So you mentioned this in your lesson learned in your introduction. Can you share a little bit more about sort of like what that process looked like, perhaps some of them that were surprising, and then how you address them internally at Gillette P&G?
Yeah, so Gillette and P&G has a very strong overall program of interns at a college level. And so we prepared most of our high school internships based on the same premises in partnership with the fact that we work closely with Dearborn in terms of what is the expectations, how do we go about seeking out top talent, how do we communicate with them, and that aspect of things. So we kind of balanced the two of those together so that we had our regular standard approach of we have structured work plans. All employees in our company have structured work plans, and we have regular feedback sessions. We have regular connections with our employees. And things like that we mimic very much so with our interns. Our interns are treated like full-time employees. In this case, sometimes we need to make sure maybe we need a little bit more. It's really actually interesting that you're talking about this as mentorship. That's something that maybe would be an opportunity area for us to focus more on, is the mentorship side of it. Whereas we're so typically focused on being able to go forward and say, here's a project, go at it. And that's kind of been our approach, and that's how we approach things in the past. So that's some of the learning that we've had, and that's what we're looking at.
Thank you. And for our school-based folks, and Oscar, I think you can answer from either side, from the school perspective or from industry perspective, but so what are the processes that you've gone through? What have those looked like at your school or in a classroom specifically to prepare students for work with employer partners? Anyone can feel free to jump in.
I think from the school-based end for us, we try to embed some of it into our curriculum. We're very lucky. Our students actually go out on a work-based learning experience as early as the 8th grade. We partner with Apprentice Learning. They're fantastic. They do a lot of early sort of professional skills, soft skills development, and do a lot of the feedback cycles that we would do for an older student. And then as they grow, they do have different interactions in the 9th grade with different industry partners. They go on field trips to places like Gillette where they have experiences versus just let's give pizza to kids and talk to them. They really get to know the facility, the people that work there. Gillette is super purposeful at picking who interacts with our students. So there is a huge amount of equity and diversity. So they're interacting with females and people of color, and they see people that have grown up in their neighborhoods. So they very much can see a clear path from where they're coming from. And then as they get a little bit older, we purposefully work with the PIC, the Boston Private Industry Council, to do some of the Signal Success curriculum, to also continue to build the skills and awareness that you need when you enter an industry field. And then work really hard to place students appropriately so they're in a place of interest. They're with mentors that we think can work with them. Yeah, I think that's what we really try to do to make sure students feel ready.
Great, thank you. Liz or Oscar?
Sure, I'll jump in a little bit. One of the things that I think it was Liz that mentioned this is so important to really highlight personal passions for students. And the way that we did it was to make sure that students, when we created this program for the entire school, we actually had a visioning day with Dell Global Communication, and the students were really part of that process. And I mentioned that because I think that as you begin to pilot these kinds of programs, you can do it with a 9th grade, you can do it with the school, you can do it with a grade level team, but really having that voice and ownership from the students as well as from the outside partners. We were very fortunate. We were in downtown Boston and we had student selected law firms, so we were able to partner with Wilmer Hale and then Fidelity Investments, as well as with Connolly Partners for marketing. So it was really about connecting students with their personal passions, but then the critical piece was about the behaviors and really making sure that there was new learning. So we had what we called small sections for the mentors and the workforce development. What is it like to work with a youngster? What is workshop instruction? How do you support onboarding kids to really understand the language? And then for the students, we had the same conversation. And it was really about what does workforce behaviors and actions look like. And then do is we would have the kids who were juniors and seniors who had gone through this process as well as mentor lead it. So it was almost kind of like a bright, you really look at who have been doing this. What was powerful for us was that students who were either 9th or 10th graders trying this for the first time, in either their about this work as well as on the workforce development. So I think that opportunity, that it has to really be going back to the communication and the clarity, who does what it looks like, and that there's flexibility. So that's the key learning on both sides that I thought was really powerful for us.
Thank you. And then Liz.
So in our classrooms, we have kind of like this internship boot camp for students. Students, they first start looking at their interests and passions, and then we kind of have like breakup group sections where they work on different skills. And we definitely have our older students, like seniors and juniors, work with younger students. They'll talk about their experiences. They'll have an opportunity to develop their informational interviewing skills. And so we have the students also work on writing phone scripts, because we have them go out into the community. They call people, call businesses that they're interested in and learning more about. So it takes a lot of work getting them from that in freshman mindset. I don't want to pick up the phone. I don't want to talk to anyone, to developing those skills and getting to the point where they'll make the phone call. And then they're encouraged to go on a whole number of informational interviews in person and work on those skills and gain confidence that way.
Excellent, thank you. Want to remind folks that they can add in their own questions into the chat or to raise your hand to be able to ask your own question. And I see we do have a question from a participant. So what strategies are used to help the industry partners understand and adapt to working with English language learners? So the examples given, say a level 3 or below, and students with IEPs or 504s. And so I wonder if both our school-based folks can answer that, and I also wonder, Andrew, if you have anything to add to that question as well. So anyone can feel free to jump in.
Sure. I'll go first on that. Having done this at a high school for English learners, which was an early college high school, Boston International, the approach primarily was to explain to, going back to my other hat, was to explain to our mentors and interns that the opportunity for the students to use language was critical. And what we did was we used the sheltered instruction model to explain to them the more you use the social language as well as the academic language with our students to really support them. The other piece that I thought was really important was that we had students who had, I know the state uses something that's called ELD, we called it ALD, academic language development, in terms of where students were. So making sure that they had a mentor or a support person, going back to Carrie's point, where if students felt that they had a support system, that was critical. And for us, it was actually from the Dearborn, I think it was Mr. Lukoski, who was with me at Boston International High School. And he was wonderful because he spoke about 5 languages and he really supported the students. And I think part of that was that students needed to have a mentor or an advocate, regardless of whether they're an English learner, special education, or even the most privileged or supported students. You're going into a new environment, so having that those feedback loops, I think, were critical. And then last but not least, what we also had for our students who really needed additional supports was we had an additional check-in for them. I think those are structural things that you put in place in the inception. And what you find is that kids are really honest with you because they really want you, they want to do their best. And what you ask them really is, what can we do to help you? And going back to that confidence and belonging piece, they were able to articulate that they needed more language and that they had, in many cases, some students had dyslexia and certain language disabilities, but they wanted to make sure that that was known up front, which I think was really powerful, going back to the advocacy point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious from others to hear your perspective on this question, the strategies used to help industry partners understand and be able to adapt and work with our students who either have IEPs or are Ls.
I mean, I think we work with Tim Lukoski. He's amazing. So much of what Oscar is saying is replicated at Dearborn. I think with Gillette, we haven't had any level 3s or below at this point. We do have FLEP students that were working at Gillette. And I think Andrew and his colleagues are very aware of that and are mindful of that. I think one thing that we often talk to students about on the student-facing side is that having multiple languages is an asset. And although sometimes you feel like you're going in at a bit of a disadvantage because you don't speak perfect English or at an advanced level, however, you do have an asset that people are excited about, and that is knowing another language fluently. And I think that's huge. And so we try to build the confidence student-facing that way by saying this isn't a deficit, this is an asset. And it's something that you should talk about, it's something that you should highlight, and something that you should be proud of. So I think that builds confidence because then they're like, oh, well, I have something that the employer might want or need on the other end. So I think that's really important when talking to students about being bi and trilingual and sometimes more. Students speak different dialects. A student that can speak Cape Verdean Creole can also speak Portuguese for the most part, and that's huge. but I think we talk to the students first about what they're comfortable with us sharing with our industry partners, and we do try to prep our partners going into interviews about strengths and areas of growth on our students, so they're kind of aware as they're asking questions, and although they're asking the same questions, they can anticipate some roadblocks that a student might have going through the interview process and if they're engaging in the internship.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, we definitely as an industry do, I mean, we look at, if I'm interviewing a student that English is a second language and they're learning their way through it, that is an accomplishment. And the fact that they are able to, we do conduct our interviews in English, but the fact that they're able to express themselves and show that type of ability after, learning a new language and still be able to be part of the conversation and confidently express themselves is a skill set that we look at for them to be able to learn, because we're always looking for learning opportunities throughout our time with us. We're looking to teach them about the way that we work and the things that we're looking for. So we look at that as a positive, as Tristan said, for having those skills.
Great. And Liz,
Kristen, go ahead.
Respond.
Liz.
I just want to say that our entire school population has internships. So we have a whole variety of different abilities and needs. What we've done in the past has worked really well is we've had a couple of students that were really struggling. We paired them up with other students, and they've been like student mentors. They've been more of like charismatic, outgoing, inclusive students that have helped really help that student engage. And it's been really cool to see, because you see over time that the student that was originally really struggling to find a place actually take off and gain more independence and develop confidence. So I definitely recommend considering that student mentorship as well at a site. Also, just having a lot of frequent meetings talking about a student's needs, what's going well, student goals, and making sure that you're on the same page and keeping that communication open is really important. We've also had ELL students, they're really successful, and they've used their language abilities as an asset in their site. We had a student work with a school nurse, and she's actually able to talk to some of the students in Spanish and help gain that connection and trust with students. We've had a student at a parent information center and a school administrative building, and she's been able to talk to parents. And they've been able to look at that and take different angles in their own projects to see about needs in the community.
Excellent, thank you. Oscar, you had something to jump in with earlier.
Just very briefly, I think many of you have mentioned it. I think that whole idea of peer-to-peer student is so critical, but making sure that there's teams. One of the other things that I think is really critical is, especially on the business end, is making sure that you highlight opportunities for what we call reciprocity in terms of the process of looking at the value and the incredible opportunities that the workforce gets. So it's really back and forth. It's not a one-way street. And I think that that's really powerful when you're looking at English learners and students who have disabilities, because that's really what the world looks like. And in many ways, one of the things that we found out that was really powerful at Connolly Partners, one of the people who was a mentor actually came forth and let people know some of the disabilities that she had, which were something that came forth as a result from a sharing process. And so it really gives the employees an opportunity to also be in the learner perspective. And it really is a powerful piece for the students to be able to share their challenges as well as the way that they're learning. So it's something to highlight.
Thank you. I want to check in with my colleagues at CCE if there's anyone that's indicated a hand raise or has a question to ask verbally versus in the chat box. I want to give an opportunity for that. So checking in with other CCE colleagues if anyone's indicated that.
There's been some great chat going on in the group chat, but no specific questions right now. However, I am curious myself to know, just, I don't know, bring a little bit as we draw toward a close of the panel. I'd love to hear from the panelists about any stories they have of a mentor and student relationship that really worked out well and felt meaningful.
So I had a student that really wasn't interested in school at all. I think our school is about her 5th high school that she had checked out, and she's pretty much ready to just quit. But she used to go to the store that she loved. They sold native crafts, and she is actually Native American herself and wanted to explore that part of her identity. So she went to the owner of the store and asked if she could do an informational interview, and it led down this path of her having this internship with her mentor. And it became a really amazing experience because she ended up meeting the local council through this mentor. And she built this whole community, she gained this whole community of all these other mentors, important people in her life, and they helped her gain more of an understanding of her own identity. And she then, of course, is also working in the store and became an assistant manager and learned those skills, doing inventory, working with customers, and things like that. And she had a really beautiful project where she was able to interview people about their identity as Native people in New England. And she had like a little exhibit, and she has an ongoing relationship with the council and her mentor. And she's actually looking at, she's someone who didn't want to pursue school really, and now she's looking at colleges and looking at graduate schools far into the future.
Powerful. Thank you, Liz, for sharing. Let's see. Andrew, do you have a particularly powerful story to share?
Yeah, there are two that come to mind, and hopefully I'm not stealing any of Kristen's stories, but obviously ours overlap. But we had an intern last summer with us who I think came in interested in engineering, but not necessarily fully passionate about it. Wasn't sure if that's what he was interested in. Wasn't sure what the summer was going to be, whether it was going to be a coffee run internship or work. And I think the line that I heard that was most interesting was, you know, he was given real world tasks to do, and he was let to run and to interpret and think, and not just sit there and do tasks that we give him, but he was actually given full, you know, work to do, and he was expected to perform and had deliverables. And that came down to his coach sitting down and laying out the expectations and communicating that this is what we're expecting, this is how we'd like to see it proceed, and then giving him the opportunity to move forward. And, you know, there was a story of him, I think it was Kristen herself that actually overheard him in a classroom saying this to other students, like, oh my goodness, they actually had me doing real work. And I'm not saying that as something that, you know, about Gillette, but it's the fact that, you know, having that mentorship relationship between the coach and the student to give them the opportunity to succeed and to push themselves and to go beyond what they think that they can do is really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then the second one, and I'd actually like to ask Kristen if she could talk a little bit about this, would be Prince from our field trip, the one that grew up in Los Angeles. I don't know if you were.
It wasn't on the field trip.
I thought you had heard about the story. Okay, anyway, so we had a student. We have a young engineer in our team who grew up in a tough neighborhood from Los Angeles, and the entire room went quiet as he spoke up, talking about his background. And this was an informal mentorship. We had looped him in specifically, not because of his background, but because of his passion for helping the community. And he's a young engineer, and he would connect well with the students. And then, but we literally could not hear, you could hear a pin drop in the room as he spoke, talking about his family back in Los Angeles and how he does things to support them. And every student that came was really paying attention to him and his background, and just hearing his genuine nature and his experience and his schooling and how he kind of moved himself from a challenging neighborhood into a career, and still is, you know, part of the family, and everything that he's doing was a really powerful experience for the ninth graders that came out to us that day. And I heard a lot of feedback actually not only heard, but I saw a lot of written feedback from those students saying, thank you for prints, thank you for that, and thank you for that information.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Kristen or Oscar, any stories you'd like to share?
Well, I could play off of Andrew. I did actually hear that. I apologize. But there were 9th grade students that came back to school that day that were like, I think I want to work at Gillette, or I want to be an engineer. And a lot of that was, I'm sorry, I didn't know the gentleman's name, but they felt a connection. And I think that's hugely important when we have students interacting with people of industry, is that there are people that have similar backgrounds or similar understandings. Is really important. My story, though, I'll throw back to the school I previously worked at, where in my 11th and 12th grade administrative role, I oversaw internships with the coordinator. And we also had a student that was very disinterested in school, or we thought she was disinterested in school, absent all the time. And I met with her, and she was very passionate about joining a pathway and having an internship. She was very quiet, didn't talk. When she was there, she often just kind of blended in, behaved, did okay. So I had multiple conversations with her, and I said, look, typically someone with your absences, we're worried about sending you on an internship. And she said, I'm going to do this. I promise I'll do this. And I said, I take chances on kids. So I said, okay. So we set her up, and she was at an internship with a restaurant advocacy group in Boston. And she was partnered with another student, and they went and they had a real experience where they were interviewing restaurant employees about their experiences. They were counseling them on their rights. They helped develop a rally for the restaurant workers. And at the end of the year, she wrote me a letter. And basically she said, I just want to say thank you, one, for seeing me. She goes, the amount of people that don't see me. Two, for taking the time to understand why I wasn't in school. And she came from a family that truly believed that she belonged at home, and that education wasn't important. And she said, three, thank you for helping me find my voice. And she went on to college, and she's currently in college now. But this is a student who didn't speak and now had the confidence to speak to strangers, to counsel people on their rights, to start a rally. And I think that what I leave that with is always take a chance on kids. Always take the chance. Sometimes it won't work out, but the times that it does, it is so impactful that it outweighs any time that you might be disappointed, and that you never know how much impact you're going to have on a student. So I think that's one of my biggest moments. And there are a few others too, of course, but that was one. Just hearing a student say thank you for seeing me and for helping me find my voice, I think is just huge.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. And we're seeing a sort of few comments pop up here, but to restate, the power of being seen and heard, how a student really feeling that cannot be overstated. So thank you for sharing that one. And Oscar, I'll offer you a chance to share a story as well.
Sure. I'll share two very briefly. And one of the things that I think is powerful about this is that the students always have a chance to give back. And I go back to the work. We had a marketing class where professionals from Connolly Partners came and taught at Cathedral. That was the first part of the year. And then the students took a second part of the semester to do a project and a pitch. And they actually won the pitch for the Museum of Fine Arts. And the Museum of Fine Arts was, the pitch that they created was, how do you make the museum accessible to, how do you make the museum current and accessible to inner city kids? And what they did was they did a shoe design project, and they connected with Converse. They were able to get shoes and actually put forth a whole design element. They were able to get the Celtics. They were able to get a lot of industries, Autodesk and others, to help them do this display. And it raised about $40,000 for the school because it's a philanthropy-based school. And then the second one was the work that they did with Cambridge Soundworks, which was our Innovative Panthers Club. And these were students who were all interested in technology. And every year they have to do an innovation project. And these students created what they call the Panther Speaker. And it's really great. It's amazing. They did it with Tom Como, who is from Como Audio Soundworks. They developed, created, innovated. They went through the whole innovation process. And these speakers are still on sale. And what's wonderful is that student Clinton Osula used that as his application for Wentworth Institute of Technology, got a full scholarship. And then the other young man, his name is Armani Lehman, was able to get into Georgetown with a full scholarship also. So it goes to show the power of kids really being able to produce, create, innovate, and more importantly, give back. And that's the power of it. The power of this is that it's not just about giving kids a chance. It's about giving kids a chance and an opportunity to shine and to show us their amazing skills, talents, and the work that they can do. And for all of us who are educators, I think it's just a great opportunity to really, going back to Kristen said, how do we see our students? Sometimes we just look at them through an A, B, C, D lens, not understanding that they have passions, interests, ideas, curiosity. And this is really what brings it forth. So that's why this is near and dear to my heart.
Thank you, Oscar. Appreciate that. So for our final question, I'll do a bit of a speed round to keep us on time. And so the last question is really, if you could offer one piece of advice to your counterpart in another school or in a company, organization, what would that one piece of advice be? If you could keep it to a sentence or two, we'll do a quick speed round, and then we'll have our next part of the workshop, which is our breakout session. So I'll start with Oscar. If you could share one piece of advice for a counterpart.
Very simple. Voice and ownership. Give the students voice so that they can own it, as well as the companies and the teams. It's about voice and ownership.
Thank you. And Liz?
Something similar, yeah. It starts from the students, their interest and passion, and that they are the ones student-directed, and that they get out there and make those connections and have those experiences.
Great. Kristen?
I'd say ownership and open communication are huge. Having students own their own experiences and then just making sure there's open communication and reflection happening as much as possible.
Thank you. And Andrew, we'll give you the final word here.
Yeah, I think it's, to me, it's clear and open communication, both in terms of expectations as well as performance and any feedback along the way. And feedback is a gift, and it should be seen as such.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. We so appreciate your time and your expertise and sharing all of your knowledge. We'll have a big virtual round of applause for you all. Again, thank you so much. And you really, I think, deepened and strengthened our knowledge here today. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And we invite each of you to stay for the breakout sessions if you're able. So to move us on to the next part of our session is we're going to move you into some breakout sessions. So you'll have an opportunity to talk to one another about what you just heard and upon some further reflection. So we've done our best to break you out into role-alike breakout rooms. So you'll see in just a moment, we'll have a prompt for you to enter into a small breakout room. Well, there'll be anywhere from probably 10 to 12 people within each room. We've done our best to group you into classroom educators, school-based coordinators or administrators, district-level coordinators or administrators, workforce and industry and community partners, and those in student support services roles. And so we'll have about 20 minutes for discussion. We'll come back together as a full group at 10:40. But we'll ask, once you get into your groups, if you can select what we're calling a recorder and reporter to share the highlights of your discussion. So recording and taking just a few notes for yourself so that you can, one of the individuals from your group can report back to the larger group about the highlights of your conversation. And there'll be an Innovation Pathways team member will be in the room, in the virtual room with you to facilitate. Before we jump into those breakout spaces, I just want to share one more time the community agreements that Diana referenced at the beginning. I think it's a good time to just reflect on them a little bit before we move into each of our breakout rooms, particularly as she noted, number 7, the step up, step back, and number 8 as well, is thinking about as we're sharing and adding onto one another's ideas, thinking about a both and mentality versus, and trying to use the word and versus but when possible. So with that, we'd ask that each of you should unmute yourself and share your video if you can, so that those in your breakout rooms can see you and you can interact with one another. You should, in just a moment, see a pop-up that comes in the middle of your screen to join a breakout room. And so we'll ask that you go ahead and join that breakout space. And then once you're into your virtual room, you'll have a facilitator there that will help move the discussion along. And we'll see you back here in about 20 minutes. So I believe that, so thank you all for that. It seems like the breakout rooms worked really well. At least in my own group, we had a really great sort of a very quick, rapid discussion, but already had the chance to exchange some resources and connect some folks to solve some of their challenges and barriers. So really appreciate you all taking part in our breakout, and hope that it was an easy technology piece to use for if you've been using it for the first time here on Zoom. So for our closing discussion, I'm going to kick it over to Dawn to bring us through our last few minutes.
Thank you, Callie, and thank you to my group as well. We ended on a note of Victoria sharing the fact that what we are doing in schools is such a great opportunity, important for young people to be able to have all of the opportunities we're providing them in the work that we do. So I want to ask us to go around in our groups. I think going in order makes sense. So maybe each group, starting with my group, since I was group number 1, the person who agreed to capture notes and share a couple of points that we talked about. And if each group could plan to briefly share 1 or 2 things that you talked about in your group, and we'll just move around the circle and hear from everyone. So in group 1, I believe it was Jenny who took some notes for us. Would you mind unmuting yourself, Jenny, and sharing?
Thank you. Yeah, we had kind of a general discussion about where we were all at in the process. Most of us in the group, I think, were pretty much at the beginning of the process, and so we took some time to share our general concern around the transportation problem for the internships that are presented in our community versus communities such as Boston, where there's ample transportation, or even our person from Brockton said they had to make sure that places were on the bus routes. We talked about ways to get around this, perhaps carpooling, or with some sign-offs on ride sharing. But we really felt that the transportation issue really becomes a problem for the students that we're trying to help the most. Those were challenges to begin with. And then finally, someone shared that they were impressed with there's so many schools willing to re-examine the way we do education, and that we're willing to work with industry to make a career pathway possible for a lot of our students who don't have the help at home. I think that was it. Did you want to add anything, Dawn?
Nope, I want to thank you. I appreciate your sharing and recapping what we talked about in group 1. I'm wondering if we can move ahead to room 2 and whomever was with Diana in her group, if that person who was planning to share could step up now and give us a quick update.
Yeah, I actually figured I'd take that, since we had a relatively short time together. I took that role myself and just recorded what I heard others discussing. And I'll just share that we sort of talked about 3 things. One is folks were sharing some things that really resonated around, for example, the Search Institute slide and the idea of really taking a chance on students, engaging student voice. But challenge-wise, there were 2 things that really came up and consumed most of the discussion in terms of sharing concerns and strategizing around. One was around when there's large numbers of students, trying to find enough internship opportunities that come with pay so that students can really make that choice to focus on something that's industry aligned and works with their long-term goals, rather than taking sort of the traditional summer jobs is a challenge. And we discussed some ways to leverage third-party folks, but it's really hard with large numbers of people, and there were no perfect solutions. And another topic we were discussing actually was around the healthcare specific industries, and particularly now with COVID-19 in the world, the idea about how soon those students will be actually able to re-engage in some of those workplaces where they are considered higher risk environments for disease transmission. And those industries in particular usually involve long precept processes anyway. So sort of the idea of trying to build meaningful relationships in what sometimes amounts to be relatively short times of actual work in the field after precept has happened. So some of those topics around the healthcare field in particular, particularly relevant right now. But yeah, it was a great conversation. Wish it could have been longer, but that's always true.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you for everyone in room 2. I want to invite the person sharing from room 3 who was meeting with Oscar to share what you talked about in your room.
Sure. Kevin, do you mind sharing?
Sure.
Go for it.
How are you? We had a good discussion. I have a tendency to chat, so I feel like I dominated our group. Sorry if I did. We talked about some practice interviewing. I talked a little bit about how good it is for students, even if they don't like the internship, to take away. They may do a 40-hour internship where they learned that this is what they don't want to do in their future, but they can still build their resume. They can still get great recommendations from the industry, and they may just want to take a slight turn on what they want to do in their post-secondary life anyway. And I share that with the students all the time. I've had students that did a very successful internship and just learned, and I tell them that they saved their parents $50,000 because they don't have to switch majors from year 2 to 3. Maybe they can get it done in 4 years instead of 5 based on an internship that they did in high school. And it's okay to learn what you don't want to do. And that's just as important as finding out what you do want to do. So we talked a little bit about that and just some different tips that we learned from the discussion. I found it very helpful. I've never been a part of anything like this with the breakout sessions on virtually. I thought it was great.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. I appreciate you speaking up and sharing for your group as well. We have 2 more breakout rooms, I believe. And so let's give a moment to the group in room 4. I believe Ruth was with you.
No, it was me.
Oh, okay. Hi, Gary.
That's okay. So I did not prepare anybody in the group to share it, and so I'm going to share out, if that's okay with the group. So there were 2 main things that we talked about. The first was around buy-in and the importance of a supportive administration. A number of people name-checked that, and just how important that was in taking this from a point where it's something the school is trying to, something that this is what Lawrence High School, for example, does. This is what we do. And so that was really interesting. And it was interesting because one of our participants was new in the position and didn't feel that sense of buy-in. So it was, that was important. And then something that came up in connection to that is people talking about how are they going to do the end of the year portfolios and exhibitions this year. And aside from being important for the students and for the program itself, they're like a huge part of bringing the community into the school. It's the time the community comes into the school to celebrate the kids. That's an important part of buy-in, an important part of connecting the school to the community. So I'm gonna, if anybody has any ideas or if anybody has figured out how do you do exhibitions now, please email us and or share with us. So, and my group was great. You guys rock. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. And room 5. Did we have a room 5 as well with Callie?
We did. That was mine, and Nancy has graciously offered to give our share outs.
Hi, I'm Nancy, and I represented room 5. One of the things that started us off with was the value of real internships. So people emphasized the need to have a real working internship, not something that was just a coffee run or a pizza and a visit kind of thing. They wanted to have boot camps or orientation blocks, both for the businesses, for the teachers, and for the students involved. They emphasized that it was important to trust the youth that we send out on these internships. Their time is valuable. They need to be given valuable work to do with the time, and it has to be appropriate work for them so that they are not bored and they can show what our young people can do. There was a question that came up about how to get started for people who don't have a strong internship program yet. And it was recommended that we contact our workforce boards because we have several people here who are really interested in that sort of thing. The workforce board members are willing to help and set up some of these internships and contacts with the business community. And if you also happen to have a great networker at your school, that would be helpful. The schools have to decide with the workforce board or with their networkers exactly what it is they need to ask their business partners for and what kind of positions they're looking for. So that was the summary of what we discussed.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for sharing.
One more group. We have one more group.
There was one more group. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Dawn. I didn't mean to step on you, but
no, Ruth, I'm very sorry. I am looking at our cheat sheet here with numbers and rooms, and I didn't know Gary had a room. So please, let's hear from your room as well before I wrap us up and pass it over to Diana.
So we got some wonderful notes from Gloria W., and we had some wonderful input from all of our attendees. So we had 3 points. One that resonated from the panelists. They loved the discussion about shifting the language from supervisor to mentor and the realization of the differences between the high school versus the college student internship and how that really needs to be looked at. And taking chances on students, especially when we talk about, this was the group from Student Support Services and students with special needs and IEPs, and that we have a tendency to be very protective of those students and that it's okay to let go a little bit and taking those chances. The discussion around that asset-based mindset about what we build on and what's most helpful about opportunities and how we bring that, the students bring their own assets to the work. And then those clear expectations to build on that asset-based mindset and build the consistency in the program. And then finally, that final question about how we can continue the work, especially now, is continuing to have those conversations even now and to continue that momentum and build around that whole school culture across the board, all students with abilities, whatever those abilities are with the IEPs, and looking at those assets, no matter the significance or whatever level of ability the students are at, those internships can be found. So thank you, Dawn. I appreciate you hearing me and hearing our group and allowing us to wrap everything up.
You're very welcome, Ruth. I would want to make sure that everyone is included. What I want to say is there were lots of excellent ideas and informative things that all of you talked about. We don't have time for me to try to recap those, but what I will say is that you all have a wealth of information about what works and about what your areas of challenge are. And I want to encourage you to connect with each other and look forward to us continuing to connect with you and responding to the many things that we talked about today. I want to prompt everyone to share your glows and grows in the chat. We are recording today and we will be capturing the chat, and we'd love to get your feedback in terms of your, again, what are your glow spots? What were the things that you heard today that you're excited about, and what are some of the areas that you know are places where you want to continue to grow? And with that, I know Diana wants to share next a little bit of what our next steps are and wrap us up for the day. So I'll pass it over to you, Diana. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dawn. So first, some upcoming events. We share these at the beginning, but I most want to highlight right now our release of the Innovation Pathways Toolkit. The event on May 11th from 1 to 2 p.m. online. You'll be getting information about that soon. But even if you can't join us on the 11th, on that date, we will make available the first iteration of our toolkit. We will continue to add to it and build to it as we learn of strong resources from you all or in the field. But we are excited that that will become available on May 11th. Otherwise, you see that there's still some other events that are up in the air. I think that's a sign of the times. Next slide. We do ask, while you're with us, to complete our survey about what worked for you today. This is new for us. We've done webinars, we've done workshops, but this attempt to fuse the two is new. So I did just put in the chat box the URL for you all to take a brief survey, should be 3 to 4 minutes as you leave today, to give us feedback on what worked for you and some of our glows and grows. Next slide. So we also want to make sure that you know about our website. We've shared this with you at the beginning, but we do invite you to check it out. We are still working on it to bring it into the kind of resource that we want it to be long-term, but it is already available for you to go on. And among other things, today's slides, eventually our webinar recording and resources will be shared for you all to access. And finally, as we near the close, we just want to thank you for your engagement today. This learning community, or as we call it, the community of practice of current and aspiring pathways, schools and districts, really thrives on the wisdom in the virtual room or in the real life room, as the case may be. And we really thank you because your engagement today and your interest in these kind of workshops is what keeps them thriving. So thank you very much. We know these are challenging times, and your dedication to almost 2 hours of working with us is really, really important. So thank you so much. And with that, we invite you to go and join whatever other commitments and responsibilities await you on the other side. Thank you.